The knock came sharp and urgent at 9:42 that Monday morning, pulling me from the quiet rhythm of my porch coffee. Ryan, Elena Vargas's young assistant, stood there pale and wide-eyed, clutching a stack of printouts like they were on fire. His cheap dress shoes shifted nervously on the welcome mat. Mr.
Hale.
Something's really wrong. The systems. They're not syncing. Compliance reports are dead. The board's waiting on Q4 ESG metrics before noon, and nothing's generating. Finance is locked out completely. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch. Ryan's hands shook. Behind those panicked eyes, I could see the storm already raging back at Summit Forge Incorporated's sleek Chicago headquarters. I didn't need to ask what had gone wrong. I already knew. Because 12 hours earlier, Elena Vargas had made the single worst decision of her brief. Explosive tenure as CEO. She had fired me.
Let me take you back to how it started.
Friday afternoon. The kind of gray Chicago day where the wind off Lake Michigan cuts through your coat like regret. I'd been with Summit Forge for 22 years. Started as a systems engineer fresh out of Purdue. Worked my way up to vice president of vendor infrastructure and compliance architecture. Most people saw the title and figured I was just another legacy suit collecting a big paycheck. They never understood what I actually did. My real name in the system was Hale Forge Solutions, LLC. 15 years ago, the board had asked me to spin off our critical vendor sync and compliance stack into an external entity for better investor optics and liability shielding. I became both VP and majority owner of the LLC. Every ESG reporting pipeline, SOC2 protocols, cloud interlocks, automated audit sequencing, partner API authentications. All of it flowed through Hale Forge under ironclad master services agreements I'd written myself, reviewed by top counsel, and signed off by previous leadership. Elena didn't know any of that. She'd arrived 6 months earlier, like a hurricane in designer heels, brought in after the previous CEO's ethics scandal, fresh from a string of turnaround gigs at smaller fintechs. She talked endlessly about synergy, lean operations, and cutting legacy drag. In her first executive review, my name popped up on a budget sheet with a high compensation figure and no bullet point summary of deliverables. That was all it took. "Why are we paying Marcus Hale this much?" she had demanded, circling my line item like it was a clerical error. She never asked me, never consulted legal, never requested a vendor registry audit. Just streamline it. HR delivered the news via a nervous intern who wouldn't meet my eyes. A one-page letter. Your role has been eliminated due to restructuring. 6 weeks severance. Contingent on returning company property. No exit interview. No acknowledgement of 2 decades. No recognition of the 3 CFOs I'd on board. The all-nighters after Hurricane Sandy, when I rebuilt our entire vendor mesh from a backup data center in St. Louis. The frameworks that kept us compliant through multiple SEC scrutiny periods. I packed my personal items quietly. Didn't rage. Rage clouds leverage. I smiled politely at the intern, walked out with my notes and a legally permitted backup of configuration files per the vendor agreement. No NDA violation. No tampering. But I did revoke my active vendor authentication keys from the backend. That wasn't sabotage. It was protocol. The system had been deliberately designed with vendor key dependency for traceability and continuity. Hale Forge wasn't just a name on paper. It was the living architecture. Without an active key holder, the compliance backbone would gracefully degrade into null sync mode. Reports would stop generating. Dashboards would time out. Partner tokens would fail checksums. All exactly as contractually specified. I walked out of Summit Forge's glass tower for the last time feeling strangely calm. The city lights reflected off the river as I drove home. 22 years reduced to a templated email. But systems don't forget. Contracts don't forgive. By Saturday, I was on my porch watching leaves scatter in the wind, thinking about the dusty ficus plant still sitting on my old office shelf. Nobody had come to say goodbye. Elena's aggressive reshuffling had everyone scrambling. Some even praised her decisiveness in Slack threads I could still see before my access lapsed. Speed feels like strategy until you cut the wrong wire. Monday morning arrived peaceful until Ryan's knock. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. The ESG pipeline is down. Board needs metrics. Legal's pinging nonstop. Ops can't access clean export logs. His voice cracked slightly. I set my coffee down carefully. You'll want to check your contracts. Ryan. He blinked. Confused. What contracts? You didn't fire an employee. You breached a master services agreement. I tapped my watch. Quarterly audit window opens in about 17 hours. His face drained of color. I didn't invite him inside. You don't rush to save people who tear down fireproof walls without reading the blueprints first. Ryan stammered something about forwarding the message to operations and left, glancing back once like he expected the ground to swallow him. Inside, I sat at my kitchen table and opened the old contract binder. Clause 22C stared back at me. The one I'd insisted on writing a decade ago when third-party auditors and new ESG mandates were piling on quarterly. Premature termination of linked personnel without 90-day vendor coordination shall trigger full liability for projected operational disruption, including a 22% penalty calculated on annual service impact projections. The lawyers had nodded. The board had signed. Everyone forgot.
Until now.
The silence in my house felt heavy with inevitability. Elena Vargas had seen a salary line and assumed it was fat. She never knew I was the bone. The architect. The keystone. By noon Monday, the panic had begun to ripple through Summit Forge like cracks in ice. I could picture it clearly even from my quiet suburban home, executives huddled in conference rooms, fingers flying across keyboards, Slack channels exploding with red error screenshots. Anyone seeing blank dashboards? Yes, G-Sync failed again. 4,003 errors on all partner nodes. Is Hailforge offline? Hailforge wasn't offline. It was simply absent. Removed. The compliance dashboard went dark first. Minor lag at first. Then full timeouts. Sync jobs stalled in endless loops. Timestamps vanished. Without real-time data feeds, no partner verifications could complete. No audit logs populated. The finance team's automated reconciliation scripts, all routed through layers I'd built, began throwing checksum mismatches. Invoices bounced. Quarterly vendor payment queues froze mid-process. External partners started calling by mid-afternoon. Why can't we access the resource portal? Where's our compliance receipt? One overseas supplier threatened formal breach proceedings. Another issued a legal inquiry asking if Summit Forge systems had been compromised. They were hitting 403 forbidden errors across authenticated zones because token rotation had halted. The backend framework was Hailforge's proprietary integration layer using dynamic key rotation tied exclusively to my vendor chain of custody. The ESG upload, required by SEC and international partners, normally ran automatically at 3 a.m. Tuesday. This time it failed silently 3 times. No fallback queue. No alerts routed. The board had once requested fail silently during Investor Week. So it did. By noon Tuesday, Summit Forge was publicly flagged for missed regulatory reporting. One line in the regulatory database shifted everything. Not because data was lost, but because the failure implied underlying instability. Summit Forge's entire investor appeal rested on operational maturity and compliance excellence. Now the backbone had hiccuped on record. I spent Tuesday morning on my porch again, coffee cooling beside me, watching squirrels chase each other through the trees. Part of me felt a quiet ache for the people scrambling. They weren't villains.
Just out of their depth.
The system had run so seamlessly for years that nobody fully mapped its dependencies anymore. Documentation existed, airtight, but it all assumed the vendor remained active. When that changed, the architecture responded exactly as designed, graceful degradation into protected null mode. No explosion. No ransomware. Just silence. A heartbeat stopping in its sleep. Around 2 p.m. My phone stayed silent. No calls from Elena. No frantic messages from legal. They were still trying to spin internally. I knew. Finance floated severance adjustments. Ops proposed retroactive transition notices. Legal suggested reframing the termination as reclassification. None of it mattered. The timestamp on the termination letter had locked the breach. Number 90-day coordination. No formal vendor disengagement protocol. Clause 22C was active. Estimated exposure, roughly $89.7 million. Conservative. Didn't include SLA violations with overseas partners, emergency remediation costs, forensic reviews, or transitional vendor onboarding. Pure contractual liability. By late afternoon, I received the first indirect signal. My attorney forwarded an internal memo summary obtained through back channels. The CFO had sat in the executive conference room with my old file open. Contract highlighted in 3 colors. Hand on his forehead. The director of compliance looked ready to be sick. They had confirmed re-authentication was impossible. Hailforge's backend used proprietary token sequencing linked to active vendor custody. No key. No access. I was the key. The board emergency Zoom was scheduled for Wednesday morning.
Cameras on.
No prep materials. Title simply, System Disruption Urgent. I imagined Elena logging in last. Polished blazer. Perfect lighting. Midwestern poise masking the storm behind her eyes. The chair opened bluntly. We're in a real-time operational crisis. Who has the full picture? The CFO spoke quietly. Failures across multiple systems. ESG uploads didn't process. Partner nodes rejecting tokens. Compliance dashboards non-functional. Finance workflows misaligned. How is this tied to one role? Someone snapped. It's not one role, the CFO said. It's one vendor. Hailforge Solutions.
Pause.
Then recognition dawning across faces. The general counsel leaned forward. North. Hailforge is the vendor of record for compliance, sync architecture, ESG framework, authenticated partner routing. The agreement lists Hailforge LLC with signature matching the former VP terminated last week. Elena sat perfectly still. I thought he was staff. He was staff and vendor in dual capacity, the CFO cut in. Legacy operational architecture. Should be uncommon, muttered a director. The chair raised a hand. Legal. Exposure. Clause 22C triggered upon termination without coordination. Full liability plus service interruption penalty. Estimated cost. Approximately $89.7 million. A younger board member swore softly. Can we resolve before quarterly filing? Not without him. He's the continuity keyholder. The word keyholder hung like a confession. Was this reviewed before termination? A board member asked. All eyes on Elena. She stared into the camera. I asked finance why he was paid so much. No one mentioned vendor contract. You didn't ask legal? Silence. Did you even know Hailforge was him? I didn't think it was relevant. The room's collective intake of breath was almost audible through the digital feed. The chair leaned forward. You didn't think confirming whether the infrastructure vendor was the person you fired was relevant. Elena's voice tightened. Operations signed off. On headcount adjustment, legal replied coldly. Not vendor severance. More silence. The kind that tastes metallic. The question came finally. Can we fix this before filing? Legal didn't soften it. Not without re-engaging the vendor. No alternate path. Dependency architecture. The message from my attorney went out at 3:12 p.m. Eastern. Subject: Vendor Termination Resolution. Hail Forge Solutions. No threats. No adjectives. Just facts. Clauses. Triggers. Body barely 6 lines. Clause 22 C clear. Entitled to full projected service coverage plus breach penalty. Data recovery labor. 90-day transitional oversight. Attached invoice, $90,114,300. Line items detailed disruption penalty. Operational restart consulting. Re-engagement under breach terms. No negotiation room. Contract said, shall be liable. At 6:27 p.m. Elena broke first. Direct email to my attorney. Short and cold but edged with desperation. We'd appreciate your cooperation in resolving this matter quickly. No greeting. No apology. No acknowledgement of the decision made from a spreadsheet. Just that single sentence. My attorney replied within the hour per my instructions. Per Clause 22C. Hail Forge will provide full transitional access upon receipt of funds. Cooperation rendered strictly as defined under Section 14. No additional provisions. No verbal agreements acknowledged. Silence followed. Not tactical. There was nothing left to argue. They'd reviewed the contract. Legal had admitted breach in writing. The board had documentation. Systems remained locked in vendor-authenticated downtime. Every delay meant mounting partner violations. Regulatory flags.
Red ink.
I wasn't angry.
Clinical.
They had treated me like a removable splinter. But I was the structural bone. Now, they would pay because the clause demanded it. I honor what I sign. Unlike Elena's town hall promises. The board met in closed session Thursday morning. Voted unanimously for emergency re-engagement under escalated terms. The chair didn't wait for Elena's input. Authority had shifted. New agreement drafted in under 4 hours. My counsel reviewed it. I didn't redline. Key clauses. Immediate reinstatement of vendor continuity license with irrevocable access to pre-existing infrastructure. Quarterly retainer renewal at increased rate with inflation protection. Direct oversight reporting to board audit subcommittee. Bypassing executive layer. Immunity from discretionary termination without 180-day mutual exit planning. They called it line item immunity. I saw it as clarity. By 4:18 p.m., my secure keys reactivated. The systems stirred like waking from deep rest. Syncs reinitiated. Dashboards refreshed. Partner APIs verified with quiet efficiency. I didn't touch code. Nothing had been deleted or corrupted. The architecture simply responded to its contracts. Not corporate politics. Elena didn't speak during handover. The chair had already restricted her access to HR and PR channels. Infrastructure and vendor matters off limits. Ryan, the assistant who delivered my termination, had been quietly reassigned to facilities reviewing printer leases. No apologies came. None were needed. They paid. They corrected. A private memo went to legal and ops. Hailforge now protected strategic vendor. Consult audit before modifying dependencies. Another to department leads. All Hailforge integrations route through audit liaison per new governance. Procedural. Exactly as I'd always built it. I reinstated monitoring layers remotely. Re-enabled ESG automation. Ran compliance simulation confirming audit baselines. The CFO sent one message that evening. Everything back to spec. Thank you. I didn't reply. They understood now. Who had built the silent guardian protecting them from lawsuits and violations for over a decade. Who had embedded redundancies, not for punishment, but preservation. Continuity isn't just uptime. It's remembering the architects of the silence behind the numbers. My return wasn't dramatic. No headlines. No boardroom speech. Just a vendor ID reactivated. Clauses respected. Systems restored as designed. I didn't attend meetings. No Zooms. No campus return. Secure handoffs only. Every quarter now. Deep in Summit Forge's SEC filings appendix. A single footnote appears beneath ESG assurance language, system supported under Hail Forge Continuity Agreement. Nobody reads it aloud. Never mentioned on investor calls. Doesn't appear in decks. But every director sees it. Elena sees it. Legal sees it. The audit committee reads it twice. It's the sentence that keeps the infrastructure standing. The reminder that some systems don't belong entirely to the company. They belong to the contracts that protect them. I don't get calls anymore. No meeting invites.
Don't need them.
At 3 a.m. Before every audit, my secure servers execute an automated ping. Silent verification script embedded in the framework confirms health. Refreshes authentications. Verifies ESG timestamps. Updates dashboards with certifiable data. No manual login. Automated. The handshake happens in silence. Real continuity doesn't announce itself. It arrives, performs, disappears. Elena still speaks at conferences. I've seen clips, leading through change. Modernizing legacy infrastructure. Polished slides. Voice steady. But hesitation appears when questions turn to compliance. A pause. A pivot. She never mentions Hail Forge. Never mentions me. Acknowledging the truth would mean admitting one hasty decision nearly collapsed the company. A spreadsheet assumption that almost cost $90 million and credibility. She wears that knowledge quietly now. The line in every filing can't be deleted. Legal won't allow it. The board won't. The system refuses. I didn't seek revenge of the screaming kind. Didn't want her job or spotlight or clawback bonus after first quarter recovery. What I received was permanent presence. Silent leverage. A line they'll never remove because removal risks collapse. I built that line. It cost them $90 million to understand its meaning. Now every board review of quarterly filings carries the awareness I'm still here. I never had to walk back through their doors. The cost wasn't just financial. It was a lesson in humility for an organization that prized speed over understanding. Elena's decisive move exposed the fragility when leadership fails to map dependencies. In corporate America, we celebrate disruptors. But sometimes the greatest disruption comes from ignoring the quiet architects who keep the machine from tearing itself apart. Ryan still works at Summit Forge. Last I heard. Facilities. He probably tells the story in hushed tones to new interns, the day they fired the wrong man and the whole system went dark. A cautionary tale about reading contracts. About seeing beyond payroll lines to the human infrastructure beneath. For me, mornings on the porch feel different now. Coffee tastes of quiet vindication. Not smugness.
Certainty.
Systems don't lie. They execute. Contracts endure. People forget at their peril. The wind moves through the trees again today. Another quarter approaches. Another silent ping at 3 a.m. Another footnote in the filing. The cycle continues. The architect remains. Invisible yet essential. What lingers is the question we all face in these towering glass buildings. How often do we cut what we don't fully understand? How many keystones do we remove thinking they're merely decoration? Summit Forge learned the hard way. $90 million and a boardroom reckoning later. They finally saw the man behind the machine. But the real cost? The trust fractured. The realization that legacy isn't always drag. Sometimes it's the foundation. And foundations, once disturbed, remind you exactly how much they hold up. In the end, the story circles back to that Monday morning knock. Ryan's trembling hands. My calm porch. The moment when a young assistant confronted the consequence of decisions made far above his pay grade. Elena Vargas's tenure continues. Clipped and monitored. Her ambition intact, but tempered by the scar of almost catastrophic failure. The board watches closer now. Legal flags vendor dependencies in red. Audit committees demand full mapping before any restructuring. Marcus Hale remains Hale Forge's keyholder. Not employee. Not insider. Strategic vendor with direct board reporting. The dual role formalized permanently. Systems hum again. ESG reports generate on schedule. Partner APIs verify without error. Compliance flows silently. Efficiently. The silence behind the numbers restored. But something fundamental shifted at Summit Forge. A new respect for the unseen architecture. For the people who design it. For the contracts that bind it. I sit on my porch this morning. Same coffee. Same trees. Another quarter begins. The automated script will run tonight at 3 a.m. Dashboards will populate. Filings will include that quiet footnote. No rage remains. No need for it. The clause executed. The system responded. Leverage asserted itself without a word spoken in anger. What remains is the lingering echo of that question every leader should ask before circling a name on a spreadsheet. Do you truly understand what you're cutting? Because some cuts don't bleed immediately. They unravel slowly, methodically,
Contractually.
until the entire structure threatens to come down. And by then, the keystone is already gone. The architect watches from the porch, waiting, not for revenge, for recognition that some foundations must never be removed.